Chettiim traveling, knee shall bow and every tongue shall tell. Jah is the highest, knee shall bow and every tongue shall tell.
In a way, Lieutenant, they are the ultimate victims of recent history. If you'll favor my comparison, they are the wandering Jews of Africa. Fleeing the Pharaoh Shaka, they are the wandering Jews of Africa. Fleeing the Pharaoh Shaka, they are the wandering Jews of Africa. Fleeing the Pharaoh Shaka into the Babylonian captivity of slavery.
All that being said, what happened to the real people of Judah in 70 AD, following the siege and destruction of Jerusalem? The ones who weren't captured by the Romans and killed or enslaved escaped. But where did they go? First, you have to understand that whenever trouble arose, such as severe famine in the land, our forefathers and mothers were known to migrate in order to avoid it. There are three famous accounts of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob heading south when famine struck at different periods in each of their lifetimes. Abraham and Jacob went all the way south to Egypt, but Isaac went as far as Gerar. And let's not forget Joseph and Mary, who also fled south to Egypt with Yeshua to escape trouble. These acts are all somewhat prophetic, as they are a major clue as to what happened to the people of Judah following the destruction of Jerusalem. In his book, From Babylon to Timbuktu, author and historian Rudolph R. Windsor, a true Hebrew, writes, "In the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son, Titus, put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. After the fall of the Carthaginian metropolis in North Africa, Roman power became dominant in the Barbary states. The pagans and the Romans attacked the Jews indiscriminately, both the Jewish soldiers and the uninvolved peaceful population. As a result of this merciless attack, many Jews fled to those parts of northwest Africa known as Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Mauritania. Many other Jews fled to the areas where Rome did not have any jurisdiction. This was to the region of the south, the Sahara Desert, and the Sudan. Windsor also tells us on page 86 and 87 that more descendants of Judah fled to the west coast of Africa in the 7th century after the Visigoths assumed power and began to suppress Hebrew customs with forced baptisms to Christianity. Windsor cites many credible sources to make his points. Among them is Joseph J. Williams, a 20th century historian who, in his 1930 book Hebrewisms of West Africa, wrote, "Whatever may be thought of the more or less mythological traditions connected with the earliest Jews in North Africa, it is now practically an established fact that a Jewish nation, Jewish at least in faith and perhaps too in origin, long held sway south of the Sahara." That said, Hebrewisms of West Africa is full of valuable information as regards the wanderings of the Hebrews following the flight from Judea, and it also gives great insight into the further scattering of our ancestors, as certain customs practiced in West Africa by our Hebrew ancestors found their way to islands like Jamaica, Haiti, the Virgin Islands, and many other places following the slave trade. So, having fled their homeland as prophesied, there our ancestors were, charting new territory in Africa and trying to carry on their Hebrew traditions in a new land, but not as savages or uncivilized barbarians. In fact, Rudolph Windsor tells us in his book, "The black Jews had an advantage over the African tribes. They carried their culture, history, laws, and written records with them. This assured them a constant precedent for the development of a higher social organization. Because of the stability of the black Jewish culture, the Jews were not absorbed into the autochthonous or native population. In fact, the Jews absorbed some of the native tribes. The Jews made use of every opportunity. They were an industrious and skillful people. In the Jewish Ghanaian states were found kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, revenue agents, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, jewelers, sculptors, masons, carpenters, painters of art, goldsmiths, leatherworkers, potters, armorers, saddlers, blacksmiths, agriculturists, etc. The survivors of the Roman siege of Jerusalem were able to flee that terror and carry on in a new land, but the relative peace our ancestors were afforded by escaping to Africa was broken by the Arab slave trade, which affected not only Hebrews, but men, women, and children from many other peoples that were usually of the lowest classes. The Eastern Arab slave trade, in particular, involved women and young girls, and a strict ratio of 2 women for each man was maintained. The Arab slave trade, as horrible as it was, eventually gave way to something much worse with the arrival of the Portuguese. Portugal broke from Arab rule somewhere between the 12th and 13th centuries and slowly rose to power. Because of this small European country, slavery would soon go from including people of lower classes from different ethnicities to being forced mainly on so-called blacks from the tribe of Judah. In the early 15th century, Portuguese shipbuilding in Lisbon and Porto adapted to the times, and the result was the caravel, a light and fast aerodynamic vessel that allowed Portuguese mariners to travel south along Africa's Atlantic coast in order to reach the gold-producing regions of sub-Saharan West Africa. After establishing several trading posts and colonies in the region, other markets began to open up, such as the lucrative commerce in India, and overseas expansion resulted from Portugal's many trade networks. The Portuguese became heavily active in slave trading in Africa around 1445, after they discovered the Cape Verde Islands and settled there. Slavery was used to fuel their expanding empire, and slave trafficking became integral to their enterprise. When it became apparent that slavery was big business, a law had to be created to protect it. Thus, the sitting Pope, Pope Nicholas V, issued a papal bull, the strongest command of a pope, titled Romanos Pontifex, Latin for the Roman Pontiff. He issued the bull to King Alfonso V of Portugal on January 8, 1455, and it allowed the king to, and I quote, invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. This was basically a license and go-ahead for King Alfonso, who alone was personally named in the papal bull, to send vessels to search out, capture, vanquish, subdue, and enslave Hebrews, particularly the people of Judah, whose existence, kingdom, and territory they were well aware of. The people of Judah were their primary concern, in fact, and they are the so-called Negroes who were rounded up and scattered throughout the 4 corners of the earth, just as Yeshua said they would be, back in Luke 21, verse 24.
They will be killed by the sword or sent away as captives to all the nations of the world.
And this also coincides with the curse of Deuteronomy 28, verse 64.
For Yah will scatter you among all the nations, from one end of the earth to the other.
When I say they were aware of who Judah was, I'm not conjecturing. Proof is in the record. If you do a Google search and type in a new and accurate map of Negro land, a list of results will pop up. As of the date of this recording, Swain.com still works. Click on it and a page will open up showing a 1747 map of West Africa by 18th century English map engraver Emmanuel Bowen. And then click on the image of the map itself. Move your mouse pointer to the area that is now present-day Ghana and click on it to enlarge the map. Click it again and you will clearly see that what is now called Ghana was once the slave coast, which the map maker labeled the Kingdom of Judah, dropping the H at the end. This is where many of the people of Judah were shipped from, like sardines in a can. Yet today, the elites and their paid professors would have you believe that we are Africans or Hamites, when in truth we are Shemites. They themselves know this to be a fact. In Zondervan's Compact Bible Dictionary, for instance, the definition for Ham reads as follows: Ham, the youngest son of Noah, born probably 96 years before the flood, and one of 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. They say not the Negroes because Shem is the progenitor or father of the Negroes. Though both lines are comprised of so-called blacks, Africans and so-called African Americans are not the same. We are Hebrews and they are Hamites. But there are still many Hebrews in Africa, however. But getting back to our history, despite the papal bull pertaining solely to the King of Portugal, that didn't stop other empires and nations from getting in on the action. Over the centuries, Spain, Britain, France, the Dutch, Canada, the United States, and many African countries participated in the transatlantic slave trade, and this fulfills certain prophecies, such as Psalm 83, which I urge you to read with your eyes open, and Joel 3 verse 6.
You have sold the people of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks, so they could take them far from their homeland.
The sad fact is, Psalm 83 is still in full effect, as our collective enemies are still conspiring to keep us in the dark as concern our true identity, and they continue to miseducate us. They really mean to wipe out the memory of the people of Israel from the face of the earth. But Yah is not going to let that happen. And this documentary is merely one step toward that effort. The present situation we are in is solely due to our forefathers failing to keep the covenant law of Yah, and it falls to us in this generation to right that wrong. And Yah said that this would happen in our day.
But I will spare some, for some of you will escape the sword when you are scattered among the lands and nations. Then in the nations where you have been carried captive, those who escape will remember me, how I have been grieved by their adulterous hearts, which have turned away from me, and by their eyes, which have lusted after their idols. They will loathe themselves for the evil they have done and for all their detestable practices, and they will know that I am Yah. I did not threaten in vain to bring this calamity on them.
You see, we, the people of Israel, are not born deserving of that name. We are born as Jacobs, or supplanters and schemers. But to truly earn the right to be called Israel, we, like our father Jacob, will have to be faithful and wrestle with Yah until we are overcomers. Those of us who do this will be the ones who will truly be called Israel and form the remnant of the kingdom. Having said that, please don't let this be the end of your search for truth on this subject. Continue to dig for it and pray that Yah gives you discernment, since a great deal of deception is out there regarding this topic, and spread the word to your friends and family, and he or she that has ears to hear and eyes to see among them will get it. I hope that this brief history has enlightened you and brought a degree of understanding as concerns our past, which goes well beyond Africa. The so-called Negroes, blacks, and African Americans are actually the descendants of the people of Judah, and that is something they don't want us to know.
The banished of Southeast Africa, fleeing Shaka's spears, going straight into the arms of the white slave traders and the British troops on the borders of the Cape Colony. In a way, Lieutenant, they are the ultimate victims of recent history. If you'll favor my comparison, they are the wandering Jews of Africa. Fleeing the Pharaoh Shaka, they are the wandering Jews of Africa. Fleeing the Pharaoh Shaka, they are the wandering Jews of Africa. Fleeing the Pharaoh Shaka into the Babylonian captivity of slavery.
Me get up me under God vibes. Pray for the wicked man ship fit capsize. Me want them realize how under God will recognize. Say when it come to God, Charlie don't compromise. Remember the 10 virgin we chastise. 5 they the fool and 5 of them wise. Some of the pin a water about them baptized. But come in Cocotica we not compromise. Give thanks and praise.